It started on one of those perfect summer afternoons. The kind where the air feels warm but not too hot. And the breeze carries the sound of children's laughter through the neighborhood. My daughter Emily had been begging me for weeks too. Let her set up a lemonade stand. She had her little sign ready, bright yellow cups, and even a recipe she had practiced with her grandmother. To her, it wasn't just about selling lemonade, it was about doing something on her own. Feeling grown up and making neighbors smile. I remember helping her set up right at the edge of our driveway. We used an old folding table, covered it with a checkered cloth, and she carefully lined up her pitchers. She wrote the price in big, bold letters, 50 cents per cup. Within the first half hour, neighbors were stopping by, kids were giggling, and people walking their dogs paused just to grab a cup and chat. Emily's face glowed with pride every time she handed over a cup of lemonade. But like clockwork, the peace didn't last long. From across the street, I saw her Denise, the HOA president, a woman with a permanent scowl etched on her face, clutching her clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. She marched over, heels clicking against the pavement, and before I could even greet her, she was already pointing at Emily's stand. "This is not allowed," she snapped. "Commercial activity on HOA property is strictly forbidden. Shut it down immediately." Emily's smile faltered. She looked up at me, confused and a little scared. I bent down beside her and said, "It's okay, sweetheart. Don't worry." Then I stood up and faced Denise. "She's just selling lemonade," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's not a business. It's a kid's stand. Everyone's enjoying it." Denise narrowed her eyes. "Rules are rules. I don't care if it's lemonade or hot dogs. This is a violation. If you don't take it down right now, you'll be fined." I could feel the eyes of my neighbors on us. Some were still sipping Emily's lemonade, watching the confrontation unfold. One of them, Mr. Johnson, an older gentleman from down the street, muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "It's lemonade, not a liquor store, Denise." A few people chuckled, but Denise wasn't amused. She scribbled something on her clipboard and said, "You'll receive a notice. If this continues, the fines will increase daily." And just like that, she stormed off, leaving behind an air of tension that hung over the cheerful little stand. Emily looked at me with wide eyes. "Daddy, am I in trouble?" she asked. I knelt beside her again and shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. You're making people happy. That's all that matters." But inside, I was boiling. This wasn't about lemonade. This was about control. Denise had made it her mission to micromanage every single detail of our neighborhood, and now she was targeting my little girl's summer dream. That night, after Emily went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I decided if Denise wanted to play the rules game, I'd play it better. I started researching HOA bylaws, city ordinances, and community regulations. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized something important. The HOA had no jurisdiction over a small lemonade stand on private property. They could fine me all they wanted, but legally, they didn't have a leg to stand on. That's when an idea began to form. If Denise wanted to escalate this, I was ready. But what she didn't know was that I had a plan brewing, one that would make sure Emily's lemonade stand wasn't just allowed, but celebrated. The next morning, Emily bounded into the kitchen, still buzzing with excitement about her lemonade stand. She had already drawn a new sign with extra decorations, little lemons, and smiley faces. But then she asked me a question that cut me to the core. "Daddy, do I have to stop? Did I do something wrong?" I hated that Denise had planted that doubt in her little mind. I smiled and hugged her tight. "No, sweetheart. You did everything right. And you know what? We're not stopping. We're going to make sure your lemonade stand is here for everyone to enjoy." She grinned, and that gave me all the motivation I needed. By mid-morning, the violation notice showed up in my mailbox. Denise hadn't wasted any time. The letter was filled with legal jargon, citing some obscure HOA clause about unauthorized commercial activity within the subdivision. They had slapped me with a $100 fine, with the threat of more fines if the violation continued. I wasn't surprised. I knew Denise's playbook by now. But instead of tearing the letter up in frustration, I tucked it neatly into a folder. 'Twas going to be evidence, fuel for the fire. Later that afternoon, Emily set up her stand again. This time, even more neighbors stopped by, probably because they'd heard about Denise's tantrum the day before. Cars slowed down just to grab a cup. Some people dropped off dollar bills and told Emily to keep the change. The support was overwhelming, and then, like clockwork, Denise showed up again. She didn't even come over this time. She just stood across the street, arms folded, glaring at us like we were criminals. When she saw Emily handing a cup of lemonade to a smiling police officer who happened to be on patrol, her jaw dropped. The officer gave Emily a high five, paid her $1, and walked off without saying a word to us. That moment sealed it for me. Denise had no power here, at least not legally. She was relying on fear and intimidation. But I had already started working on my counterattack. That evening, I drove downtown to City Hall. I explained the situation to the clerk at the business licensing office. At first, she chuckled. A kid's lemonade stand. Oh, is really trying to shut that down? Yeah, I said, sighing. They're threatening fines. My daughter's just a little kid, but they're treating her like she's running a corporation. The clerk shook her head. Ridiculous? Well, here's what you can do. There's a small vendor permit that covers youth initiatives. It's cheap, easy to get, and once it's approved, the HOA can't touch you. I filled out the application right then and there. By the end of the week, we had it. An official city permit, complete with a seal and my daughter's name on it. Emily was now a recognized vendor in the city. When I showed her the permit, her eyes lit up. Does this mean Denise can't stop me anymore? She asked. That's exactly what it means, I said, grinning. Now you're not just selling lemonade, you're running a legal, city-approved business. Emily proudly taped the permit to the front of her stand the next day. Neighbors gathered again, and this time there was a sense of celebration. People clapped when they saw the permit. Mr. Johnson even joked, "Guess I better get a loyalty card, Emily." And then came the best part. Denise marched down the street, HOA violation notice in hand, ready to cause another scene. But when she saw the official city permit taped to the stand, her face went pale. "What is this?" she demanded. "It's a permit," I said calmly, handing her a copy. "Issued by the city. Emily's lemonade stand is now fully authorized, which means your HOA fines are worthless." Neighbors started to laugh, some even applauding. Denise sputtered, waving the violation notice in the air. "This is against HOA rules." "Maybe so," I replied, "but the city outranks your rules. And the city says Emily can sell lemonade all summer long." For the first time, Denise didn't have a comeback. She turned on her heel and stormed off, but not before muttering something about calling an emergency meeting. I knew then this wasn't over. Denise wasn't the type to back down quietly. She'd be plotting her next move. But what she didn't realize was that I had only just begun to fight back in this time. I wasn't alone. The days following Denise's embarrassing defeat were some of the best of the summer. Emily's lemonade stand became more than just a small table with cups of lemonade. It became the neighborhood's new gathering spot. Kids came by on bikes. Parents stopped for a drink after evening walks, and even local delivery drivers would swing by just to buy a cup. Emily beamed with pride every time she poured someone a glass. But success has a way of making enemies even louder. Denise couldn't stand it. She drove past slowly every day, scowling at the stand like it was a personal attack on her power. And then, one afternoon, she showed up with reinforcements, 2 members of the HOA board at her side. She marched right up to Emily's stand and slapped another violation notice down on the table, right next to the pitcher of lemonade. Emily's smile faded as she looked up at me. "This isn't over," Denise snapped. "City permit or not, you're still subject to HOA regulations. And as president, I'm telling you this stand has to go." I took a deep breath, picked up the violation notice, and tore it clean in half. "Denise," I said firmly, "this piece of paper means nothing. The city has already spoken. Your HOA rules don't trump city law." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting being dragged into Denise's little crusade. The other mumbled something about looking into it and hurried away. Denise, however, refused to back down. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Before storming off, the neighbors who were watching applauded again, cheering Emily on. But I knew this wasn't just about a lemonade stand anymore. Denise's pride had been wounded, and when that happened, she usually doubled down. Sure enough, a few days later, we received a letter in the mail, not a flimsy HOA notice this time, but a formal complaint. Denise had filed an official grievance with the city, claiming Emily's stand was creating traffic congestion and lowering property values. It was laughable, but also dangerous. If the city bought into her nonsense, Emily's hard-won permit could be revoked. I wasn't about to let that happen. The next morning, I called City Hall and set up a meeting. When Emily and I walked in with our folder of documents, the clerk greeted us warmly. "Don't worry," she said. "We've already had several people from your neighborhood call us. They all said wonderful things about Emily's stand." Sure enough, the city official handling the complaint chuckled as he read through Denise's claims. Traffic congestion. From a lemonade stand? Property values going down. This is absurd. But I knew we had to make our case airtight. So I presented the signed statements from our neighbors, along with photos of smiling families enjoying lemonade. Even the police officer who had bought a cup that day wrote a note of support. By the end of the meeting, the official leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, I think it's safe to say the complaint is dismissed. Emily's permit stands." Emily cheered, and I couldn't help but smile. But the victory was even sweeter when I learned what else the city had decided. They had flagged Denise for filing what they considered a frivolous complaint. To many of those, and the city could fine her instead. When we returned home, Denise was waiting at the end of her driveway, arms crossed. She clearly expected to see defeat on my face. Instead, I waved the official letter from the city dismissing her complaint. "Better luck next time." I called out, her face turned red, and she spun on her heel, storming back inside. The neighbors nearby chuckled, shaking their heads. At this point, Denise was becoming more of a joke than a leader. But deep down, I knew she wasn't done. She never was. And when she finally made her next move, it was so bold and desperate that even I was caught off guard. Denise had been humiliated twice, now once by the city issuing Emily a permit, and again when her official complaint was dismissed. For most people, that would have been the end of it. But for Denise, it only fueled her obsession. One hot Saturday morning, as Emily and I were setting up her stand, we noticed something strange. A big white sign had been staked into the ground across from our house. It read, "Unauthorized commercial activity prohibited. HOA enforcement in progress." Denise wasn't even hiding her intentions anymore. She had made her own official-looking sign, complete with the HOA logo at the bottom, and planted it where every neighbor could see. Emily frowned. "Dad, is this bad?" I crouched down beside her. "No, sweetheart. It just means Denise is trying harder to scare us. But remember, scare tactics only work if we let them." Sure enough, Denise came marching over moments later, HOA clipboard in hand. "This is your final warning," she said smugly. "If you don't shut this down today, We'll start issuing fines every single day until you comply, and those fines will add up quickly." I stood up slowly and looked her dead in the eye. "Denise, you've already lost. Twice, the city says Emily can run her stand. And nothing in your HOA handbook overrides that. You're bluffing." But Denise smirked. "Oh, I'm not bluffing. You'll see." She strutted off, leaving Emily worried. But instead of panicking, I made a phone call. Not to the city this time, but to the local news station. If Denise wanted a fight, I was going to shine the brightest spotlight on her nonsense. The next weekend, just as Emily was setting out her cups, a local reporter showed up with a cameraman. They interviewed Emily about her lemonade stand, asking her why she started it. Emily shyly explained that she wanted to save up for a new bike and how much fun it was to meet neighbors. The reporter nodded and then turned to me. "And what about the HOA's objections?" I pulled out the stack of violation notices and complaint letters Denise had sent. "This," I said, holding them up, "is what happens when power goes unchecked. My daughter's lemonade stand is harmless, but the HOA president has turned it into a personal vendetta. The city already sided with us, but she won't let it go." That evening, the story aired on the local news under the headline, "HOA President Targets Child's Lemonade Stand." The reaction was explosive. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate Emily. Strangers from outside the community drove over just to buy a cup of lemonade and show their support. The next day, people were honking their horns as they drove past, yelling, "Go Emily!" Denise, on the other hand, was nowhere to be seen. For days, she stayed inside, curtains drawn, avoiding everyone. When she finally emerged, was only to remove the ridiculous enforcement sign she had planted in the ground. But Denise wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. And though she'd been publicly humiliated now, I could see the fire in her eyes the next time she glared at me from across the street. The difference this time was that she had lost her authority. Neighbors who once blindly followed her were now openly laughing at her behind her back. And soon, Denise's anger would push her into making a mistake so big it didn't just cost her pride. It cost her the very position she clung to so desperately. Denise couldn't handle the humiliation. The local news story had spread far and wide, neighbors laughed at her. Strangers drove by just to support Emily, and the HOA board was suddenly flooded with angry emails demanding to know why their president was targeting a child. Instead of backing down, Denise doubled down. She called a special HOA meeting where she planned to push through new rules banning all front yard sales, stands, and unsanctioned commerce. She figured if she couldn't single out Emily, she'd make a broad rule that just happened to crush her little stand. But Ovise made a critical mistake. She underestimated how much goodwill Emily had earned in the neighborhood. The night of the meeting, the HOA clubhouse was packed. Dozens of families showed up, many of them holding cups of lemonade in solidarity. Even people who rarely bothered with HOA business came to see Denise's latest stunt. Denise banged her gavel and began her rant about preserving neighborhood standards and preventing nuisances. But when it came time for discussion, one neighbor stood up. "Denise, my son mows lawns for pocket money. Does that count as an unsanctioned business?" Another neighbor chimed in. "My daughter babysits. Is she banned too?" A third spoke up. "If kids can't even run a lemonade stand, what's next? No bake sales, no garage sales." The room erupted with agreement. People weren't just annoyed anymore, they were angry. And then, the city official who had issued Emily's permit walked in. Denise froze. He stepped to the front and spoke clearly. "Just so everyone here is aware, this HOA has no authority to override city permits. Attempting to do so could result in legal consequences. And frankly, this entire matter has been an embarrassment for the community." By the time he finished, Denise's face was red as a tomato. When the votes were cast, Denise's proposal wasn't just rejected, was overwhelmingly shot down. And to make matters worse for her, a group of neighbors immediately called for a recall vote to remove her as HOA president. Within weeks, Denise was stripped of her title. The same neighbors who once feared her were now relieved to see her go. As for Emily, her lemonade stand became a local legend. Cars would pull up from other neighborhoods just to buy a cup. Neighbors started calling her the CEO of lemonade. Lane, she saved enough for her bike, a college fund, and more. And me. I learned something important. Sometimes, the best way to fight bullies isn't just with anger. With patience, it's community, and a little bit of sunlight to expose their nonsense. So, in the end, the HOA president who tried to crush a little girl's lemonade stand ended up losing her power, her reputation, and the respect of the entire neighborhood. And Emily? She didn't just win, she taught us all that even the smallest voice can stand tall when backed by the truth. Because when a bully underestimates you, they usually don't realize they're setting themselves up for their own downfall.